Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the presidents of Russia, Turkey and Iran will meet in the Black Sea city of Sochi on Thursday for talks on the war in Syria, trying to come up with a more effective solution than the peace talks in 2016 that made little progress. Now, on the other hand, is obviously a complicated affair. What started as a peaceful uprising in Syria against President Bashar al-Assad has entered its 8th year of a full-scale war, leaving over 350,000 people dead in its wake. Now, this includes 110,000 civilians. There are also those who are missing, and that number is around 56 to 57,000, and these people are presumed dead. Now, many foreign powers are involved, of course, including Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and NATO allies US and Turkey, all supporting either the Assad government or fighting it with the support of militant groups. Currently, what we're seeing in Russia is the last battle to wipe out ISIS. And as it takes place east of the Euphrates in a small village called Bahuz, where there's an estimated somewhere around 400 to 600 fighters battling it out against the US-led coalition. Of course, reports always come in from war monitors claiming the lives of many civilians who have been killed in this. In the last 24 hours, we've heard at least an estimate of over a dozen civilians who have been killed. But there's much more to this story. Also, a Warsaw Summit is about to begin in Poland. And with that, there is an agenda that we also want to talk about that reflects on the situation in Syria. Before I get into the details, let me welcome our guests who are joining us. Today, we have the Russian editor of The Economist and the author of The Invention of Russia, Mr. Arkady Ostrovsky, who is joining us from London. And also we have Ms. Merve Keskin, who's a researcher at TRT and an expert on Iran's foreign policy and proxy wars, joining us from Istanbul. Welcome to the show, both of you. I want to start off with you, Ms. Merve, just trying to highlight the importance of what these talks will promise, or of what we can foresee from here, especially when the presidents are planning to meet at the end of this month to talk about the situation in Syria. What, in your opinion, can we expect?
Before the importance of the talks, let me start with this point. Turkey has two priorities in Syria. One of them is, of course, to bring peace and stability in Syria, like other parties, and the other, of course, are national security. Turkey protects its border from terrorism, and as the country has been fighting for against the PKK, now Turkey will not allow any kind of de facto region of YPG and PYD, the Syrian branches of PKK. So Turkish government is clear on this, and they changed the balance of power in Syria through their military operations. And in this regard, Idlib is a very significant region for these key policies, and also the east of Euphrates for these policies, and also to prevent another humanitarian catastrophe. So the tomorrow meeting is very critical, and it actually depends on the negotiations between Russia and Turkey, whether they will meet together or not.
All right, and coming to you, Mr. Arkady, if I could get your comments on the significance of this meeting that we're expecting, where President Rouhani, Putin, and Erdogan are we expecting any kind of agreement, some kind of constructive agreement, a plan to be achieved from this?
Thank you for inviting me on the program. Look, the significance of this summit is actually the summit itself. In a way, it's the theater of it, it's the symbolism of it for Russia. I mean, that's one reason. We'll come to the sort of substance of it in a second. But in terms of sort of how Russia is presenting it, how it is seen internationally, there we are, 5 years or 4 years after Russia's intervention in Syria. The main summit is held in the Russian city of Sochi. Russia has played a crucial role in the conflict, which the United States, when it went into it, didn't really expect to see Russian troops. So Russia is projecting this image of, Russia has prevailed. It's a global power. It's the one that holds all the cards, or important cards, on the conflict. Shortly before the summit, the Russian Foreign Ministry demanded that the United States withdraws all its troops from Syria. And again, this is sort of rubbing it in, saying, America is out, we're in. So there is a sort of symbolism of a big symmetry, which to Russia is very important because remember, the main reason Russia went into this conflict was to establish itself as indisposable global power that has to be included in any of the world affairs. And in that sense, it feels this summit is sort of is part of that. In terms of the substance, things are much more complicated because, of course, Russia, Turkey, and Iran are not the natural. It's not the most natural alliance. I mean, there are a lot of disagreements. I mean, to start with, that Turkey wanted Assad out, Russia was backing Assad. I mean, now the Russians. It looks like there is tension building between Russia and Turkey as Russia wants Ankara to deal with the region of Idlib and eliminate jihadists there, whereas Turkey is more concerned about the provision of safety for the Turks in Syria. And of course, the power that probably has most in sort of the greatest region in the greatest interest in the region and is prepared to fight for it is Iran.
Right. And Ms. Merve, already BIF talks, and thank you for correcting me, they are to take place on Thursday. There is already, we're seeing Russia and Turkey having problems to come on the same page regarding this, as Mr. Ostrovsky mentioned, especially over the Idlib issue. Could you also highlight what how this might affect their conflicting agendas that Turkey and Russia have when it comes to Syria, in your opinion?
Nowadays, some experts are talking about different scenarios that parties may consider. One of them is, Turkey's military operation against the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now they are in Idlib, and to clean the region from them. But however, this means another battle in Syria for Turkey, and this is not likely for us. And another one to approve a Russian-led military operation by Assad regime. But this might another further humanitarian catastrophe, and Turkey is hosting more than 4 million refugees, so this scenario is also not likely. Maybe they also suggest another scenario for Turkey. This is about rebranding Hayat Tahrir al-Sham because they cut their lives linked to Al-Qaeda, but this is not a realistic option in the eyes of international community. So maybe Turkey can turn Idlib into a freezing conflict, so they can gain time in this period. But this can make the HTS to gain more. This make HTS more free to move forward in the region Idlib in the meantime. So for all these scenarios, one thing is clear, that Russia and Turkey should take joint action against the terrorism and to preclude further humanitarian catastrophe.
Especially right before a key summit that will or could possibly help the situation in Syria. Now here I'd like to welcome our third guest, Dr. Eleonora Tafuro. She's a researcher for the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. She's joining us from Milan. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newswire. We're talking about how we are seeing right before this important summit to be taking that will take place on Thursday between Russia and Turkey and Iran. We're seeing Russia and Turkey coming at odds over Syria, especially when it comes to Idlib. Do you feel like this will strain the relations furthermore? And could we see a replay of what happened in 2016, where nothing effective really came out of it, no progress was essentially achieved?
Well, unfortunately, we are accustomed to having these high expectations about meetings that, in fact, don't deliver important results. But I would say that the very fact that the trio continues to meet and discuss very different security interests and try to accommodate each other's interests, well, I mean, that is a result in itself. That said, the situation is very difficult and highly dynamic, not only for the humanitarian consequences of the conflict, of course, but also for the political repercussions and the that, for example, the flow of refugees have. So there is an urgent need to solve the issues at the table, which this meeting is not expected to give us. The main divergences are two, essentially. The future of the northeast area of Syria that now is under U.S.'s control, and Idlib, as you mentioned, which remains a bone of contention between Russia and Turkey. So far, they have managed to accommodate each other, but the balance there is very fragile.
Okay, since the balance, we're still talking about the relationship, and this is something new as it is evolving. Mr. Ostrovsky, this is obviously raising some concerns with the U.S. allies. I mean, Turkey is a U.S. ally, and so I was asking the relationship that we see between Turkey and Russia, them warming up, must be a big concern in Washington.
It is a big concern. I mean, Russia has been trying for years very hard to drive wedges and create splits between allies, between America and Europe, within NATO. Turkey has been, a very successful party in that sense. To the extent that Russia was very prepared to overlook the fact that it was Turkey that is the only NATO country that actually shot down Russian planes flying near the, going into the Turkish airspace. I mean, neither America nor any other NATO allies actually have engaged in a kinetic, conflict with official Russian military forces. But Russia is prepared to overlook that because the value of sowing discontent within NATO is greater almost than anything else. Syria itself was interesting to Russia precisely because it was a conflict where it could interfere, and oppose America. Pretty much everything Russia does on the foreign policy front is about the U.S., whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Latin America, because Russia feels this is the relationship, the bilateral relationship that really matters. And in terms of where we go from here, I think with America, I mean, paradoxically, with America gone, the incentive for Russia to stay in that conflict weakens, and the chances of some sort of tension rising between Russia and Turkey increases because, frankly, for example, the, Kurds, Russia is now, there is a vacuum of, with America gone, the Kurds can't turn to America, they will turn to Russia. I mean, how that's going to play between the Kurds and the Turks is going to be a very interesting dynamic to see.
And surely will affect how what kind of agreement is achieved in these talks, because this, of course, plays a major role. But coming back to you, Ms. Merve, there's also a little more going on between Turkey and Russia in terms of their relationship. Turkey is, I believe, about to purchase a missile system, S-400s, from Russia, despite warnings from the U.S. Of possible sanctions, no?
Yeah, but Turkey, I mean, the negotiating with Washington had some problems, because as long as the U.S. continue to support YPG, they should understand PYD is not a reliable partner. And they are wasting the U.S. time to gain more power by saying that ISIS was eliminated completely. Saying this for 1 year, actually. But what U.S. should do, as Turkey's NATO ally, is to negotiate with Turkey and to finish support to YPG, because as the other speaker said, this make the Russia more. This increases Russia's freedom in action, freedom of action in the northeastern Syria, actually.
Right, and Ms. Eleonora, just to get your comments on that regarding how this relationship is in constant flux. We're seeing, of course, tensions between US and Turkey over the buffer zone, also a security strip of 32 kilometers deep that they want to establish, and of course backing the opposite ends of the militant groups on the ground. So how do you see this affecting? Can we expect something significant, especially as we see more the ties warm up between Turkey and Russia?
So I was saying that from the Russian point of view, everything is better than the US's presence on the ground. So the main goal of the Kremlin at the moment is to drive Turkey and Syria closer together. So, for instance, in the northeast, when the US will withdraw, Russia aims to have a sort of presence, a Turkish presence, together with the Syrian regime. And this would be not the ideal situation because Russia is very concerned about the unity of the Syrian state. But it would be a good compromise in order to have the U.S. out and Turkey in, but relatively under Russian sort of supervision. So I think the Kremlin is investing a lot of resources in trying to convince Turkey to work with the Syrian regime. I mean, they always mention this Adana agreement back in '98, and the closer relationship that used to exist before between Syria and Turkey. So they want to sort of bring those golden times back.
Right. And hold on to that, Eleonora. Let me quickly bring in Mr. Ostrovsky here again. At the same time as this summit will take place here in Russia, we're also expecting an important summit to take place in Poland, and there the conversation is, as critics are saying, a very, very anti-Iran. The timing is very interesting of the Warsaw Summit, don't you think, Mr. Ostrovsky?
I mean, there are several, concerns. Russia has now become one of the, for NATO, for the West, unfortunately, has become one of the biggest security threats. And this makes the dealing with Iran a lot harder. So, in the past, Russia on the whole went along with the international community, with the US and Iran, and this can no longer stand. So new sort of policy has to be worked out because the West and NATO now has sort of problems and adversaries as they see it, on both sides, in Iran and in Russia, and the Russia cannot be really counted on given the level of relationship between Russia and the West in cooperating on Iran.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because in this Warsaw Summit, we're also seeing that, well, first of all, Iran's not invited at all. Russia was invited. They've declined categorically. And other key European members have also voiced their concerns that the agenda of the summit is something they don't agree upon.
Well, this is it. I mean, for Russia, again, this is a sort of a PR coup to show that unless Russia is at the table, no deal, no solution to any international problem can be found. It's, in a way, it's sort of, if you like, bombing or talking yourself or driving yourself to forcing yourself to a negotiating table on any issue. I mean, what's important to Russia is that it sits at the table, not the actual outcome of those talks.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Ostrovsky, for your input there. Now, coming back to you, Merve, at the same time, while these talks take place, what we're seeing in Syria is a battle to wipe out ISIS. There's a lot of debate going on regarding whether it's a fight to eliminate the ISIS ideology. My question to you really is that even if they do manage to remove those 400 to 600 ISIS fighters, will they be able to finally suppress the movement, or do you think they will go underground?
I think the second option is likely, as you said. They will move. They will go to underground because, you know, the ISIS was born of the dashes of the U.S. invasion of 2003. So the thing they should do, I mean, the United States, actually to eliminate also YPG and PYD from the region, and to control the significant places that ISIS can born again. So another point actually, the US announced their withdrawal from Syria in April, they said. And in this hotspot, even in 2 months, it's very critical. So in this regard, what Turkey needs to do is to posit their control in Idlib and the other areas on more solid grounds. What US offers as a buffer zone is actually not an option, not on Turkey's option, because of the previous experience in northern Iraq. So for Washington, this is a way to restrain Turkey's control in Syria. But as I said before, they should negotiate with Turkey in this regard to prevent further ISIS resurgence.
Okay, and Ms. Eleonora, coming to you quickly again on ISIS and whether they will be able to eliminate them in this battle as it goes on in Bahuz. Do you believe that the group might morph back into an underground insurgency and activate sleeper cells and reappear somewhere else, whether in Syria or the region?
Unfortunately, we are talking about a very complex phenomenon, and Russia has already made a mistake back in the 90s with Chechnya. They claimed that they had eliminated completely the threat of terrorism with their blunt military operation, but we cannot deal with these problems in such a way. These are very complex problems, and unfortunately, I don't think it is possible to eliminate them completely unless we go to the root causes of terrorism, and the root causes are still there. So we can, of course, and we should hope for a temporary victory, but a permanent one will be far more difficult to achieve.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Eleonora, for your report. Coming back to you, Ms. Merve, as this situation evolves, we're seeing a lot of civilians fleeing this conflict zone here in the eastern side of Syria, where this battle is taking place with US-led coalition forces there. But we're also coming across, besides, of course, civilian deaths, we're also coming across this humanitarian issue where detainees, those fleeing are detained. And there's a big question of how it will be determined whether they are innocent civilians or ISIS fighters.
As long as the terrorism, as long as the terrorist groups like the Tahrir al-Sham and the other groups, the humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance will be at risk. So to continue to humanitarian assistance and to prevent the further humanitarian disaster, actually the tomorrow meeting is critical in this regard. Not also the military operations, but also the humanitarian aid, because this is urgent. So, but as I said before, Turkey has done their best effort for the Syrian refugees. So they need. This meeting will be the last. This meeting will should bring the further the humanitarian assistance, and
it remains to be seen, and we can be hopeful that the meeting will evolve into some kind of framework of how these refugees will be repatriated, and also those fleeing within the country will be taken care of. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Merve. With that, we're going to take a quick short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire, discussing the fate of Syria as the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces are continuing their fight against ISIS in a small town in eastern Syria. There are reports coming in from war monitors and the Syrian humanitarian from war monitors that a dozen civilians have been killed, including children, in the past 24 hours. Now, as this battle continues, we're expecting an important key summit to take place in Russia, where the presidents of Iran, Turkey, and Russia will meet. At the same time, Warsaw Summit is expected in Poland. To talk more about what this will turn out to be for Syria's fate, I'd like to welcome two new guests here on Newswire. Mr. Hamid Reza is a foreign policy expert. He's joining us from Tehran. And also we have with us Dr. Yahya al-Arkadi. He's a Syrian politician. Welcome to the show, both of you. I want to start off with talking about the Warsaw Summit. Dr. Yahya, how do you see this summit and what is the agenda really behind it?
First, the summit comes at a time when the Astana meeting is postponed. And the Astana meeting concerning Syria is supposed to take care of the so-called de-escalation zones in Syria. Now, those are postponed till April, and we don't know whether they are going to be held or not. Now, the summit, the tripartite summit in Sochi, is supposed to take care of the northeastern part of Syria, the situation in Idlib, and the political process. Those three issues are going to be on the agenda of the summit, and the three parties, we believe, are concerned in finding a political solution for Syria. And we hope that they can find a political solution, especially when they are the main arbiters in Syria. We understand that the alliance forces are in Syria, the United States, Israel from time to time just targets certain targets in Syria pertaining to the Iranian forces in Syria. All these things are happening, and we hope that this tripartite summit would come up with specific results related to these three hot issues. And what we care about really is not to have more attention, not to have more escalation, not to for Syrians to shed more blood, because we believe that those whose hands are deeply involved in the Syrian case, be they right or not, whether they are right or not, I think it's time for them to move to the political era, to the political phase of doing things. In military, at the military level, they did what they wanted. They killed Syrians. I mean the Russians and the Iranians and the regime. They killed Syrians. They displaced them. Many Syrians are in jail, in thousands in jail. Many of them are dying under torture. People are suffering, even when they are loyal to the regime, they are suffering economically. Iran is taking advantage of the economic situation and trying to spread ideologically inside the Syrian society. All these things are happening, but this does not bring peace to Syria. What is happening is the best prescription for the continuity of tension in Syria. And this is what we don't want. 25 million Syrians do not want this to be happening. They want their country to come back to life, and the people displaced all over the world, over 10 million people, they wanted them to come back in a normal way, to a safe environment, to a secure
Dr.
environment.
Yahya, I'm sorry to interrupt here. It's obviously the main goal, allegedly, by even the foreign forces involved in Syria, is to bring peace to the region. But that obviously can be questioned from intentions to actions. However, the political solution is the biggest problem. How does that evolve within within Syria, without the interference of Russia or Turkey or US or other allies who continue to play an integral role in the civil war that's taking place within its borders?
Well, let me tell you, there is the Geneva Communique, which was issued by the United Nations Security Council 2012. And there is also the Security Council Resolution 2254. And they talk about a political solution. Unfortunately, those are not adhered to. We hear from the Russians, we hear from the Iranians, we hear from Turks, we hear from everybody that they are all committed to the implementation of the Resolution 2254. But we hear a lot.
But we don't see enough action. I mean, it's coming to 8 years of war now. I mean, this is one of the most...
I understand, but there is too much talk.
And no action.
No action.
No action. Exactly. Let me bring in Mr. Hamid here on this conversation.
Of these resolutions. This is what brings peace to Syria.
Right. I mean, the resolutions are all well, but when it comes to implementation, there's a big yawning gap there. Now, Mr. Hamid, talking about not just the Warsaw Summit, President Trump, Pompeo, everybody who seems to be expressing such great concern about the deteriorating situation in the Middle East has put forward this agenda that this is what this summit will be about. But we're not inviting key members here. Iran was absolutely not invited. In fact, I think a very interesting quote from one of the dignitaries, a Polish ambassador to Afghanistan, actually said that Poland has lost control of the general message of the conference to US and Israel. How do you see the agenda of the Warsaw Summit coming back to back with what is expected in Sochi between the presidents of Iran, Turkey, and Russia?
First, thank you very much for having me. As political analysts, our duty is to read between the lines and not just follow mainstream media and what their agenda is giving to us. U.S. officials are saying many things about the goals they are following in Warsaw Summit, but to actually understand what the reality and what the truth is, we should look more carefully. The point is that the Warsaw Summit is a psychological warfare and an effort, I believe, that already doomed to failure by the United States to actually buy other partners into its own policies in the region, in this part of the world, so that they can have, let's say, so that they can have the support from other countries, mostly right-wing countries, and in politics like Hungary, like Poland, and of course Israel, to put in pressure on Iran and Russia. Let's not forget that Polish people are totally against Russia. They have a very, let's say, fearful memories from Russia and what they have experienced. I'm not going to judge between them, but that's the reality. They are fearful about Russia. They are fearful about other European countries. They still fear from, for example, Germany having power in that region, too much power to their sense. And so they have no option but to get in line with the United States and ask for the U.S. support in the region and in their security, which I believe is some sort of lack of independence for Poland, unfortunately. On the other hand, we have Israel, so it's trying to have an agenda of working with anti-Semitism and such ideas and things to, let's say, to buy support from other countries and to force other countries to follow its agenda to actually, let's say, fight against countries like
let me rephrase the question here. When somebody like the Polish ambassador to Afghanistan, who's just returned from his duty there, has come back and said Poland has essentially lost the agenda to the US and Israel, that this is not really about peace. I mean, this is what he's implying. It's not about peace in the Middle East. What do you think he's trying to say? What is the summit about, really, for America? What are they looking to achieve?
That's what the United States is trying to show, that it has some word to say because it has lost its dominance, its place in the Middle East. You're seeing that the Astana talks and the Sochi talks has excluded the United States and European countries, and they don't have any further role in this region. So they're trying to show a fake position and create a fabricated position for themselves to show that, okay, we have a word to say, we have some power to play a role in the Middle East peace. While on the other hand, we know that by many many evidence and that the United States has been behind formation of ISIS and many terrorist groups in the region. We know that they have been supporting Al-Qaeda, they have been supporting ISIS both in Iraq and in Syria. And President Trump himself had actually admitted that, Ms. Clinton had admitted that, Michael Flynn once admitted that. Many documents actually and evidence are showing that the United States was involved in promoting them. So how
Iran rhetoric. Let's talk a little about their is there a possible anti-Iran rhetoric? Are they looking possibly for allies in trying to team up against Iran? Do you see any such possibility that is part of the agenda of this Warsaw Summit?
It seemed that at first that it was mainly this objective for the meeting, but the summit. But since it was something, let's say, stubborn, we can say, something that was not based on realities on the ground, the United States failed actually in that. So they actually had to withdraw from the first objective. So they changed the agenda and they changed the topic. But still, the United States is trying to depict Iran as a demon, as a threat to the security and the peace in world and in region, and it's trying to actually establish that rhetoric in Warsaw Summit to introduce Iran to the countries attending the summit as a threat to security and to threat to peace in the region and in the world, trying to connect the missile program of Iran, which is totally defensive, to the threat rhetoric that they have regarding Iran. So that's what the anti-Iran part of the rhetoric and agenda that the United States is following in Warsaw.
Right. Okay. So, Dr. Yahya, I come to you about this also. We're talking about what the U.S.'s role is going to be, not just in the Middle East, especially in Syria. I mean, when Moscow last time tried to initiate peace talks, Syrian opposition parties came out declaring that we're going to completely boycott this. We have no confidence in Russia. But at the same time, we're looking at the U.S., who, in a complete surprise announcement, said that we are withdrawing troops. And here we are seeing them as someone that can be relied on in trying to bring this conflict to an end.
What concerns me as a Syrian is not to see foreign troops or foreign forces on my land, on my Syria, in my home, destroying cities, displacing people, putting people in jail, and penetrating life in a satanic way. Now, my question is, what is Iran doing in Syria? They say that they came to the rescue of the resistance and steadfastness in the face of Israel. We know that this regime that they came to help, this Assad regime, hasn't fired a bullet since 1974, although the Golan Heights of Syria is occupied. This is one. Number two, the Iranian territory is quite clear. Iran doesn't have, nobody obliged Iran to jump over Iraq and to come into Syria under the pretext of keeping or protecting religious shrines. These religious shrines in Syria have been there for hundreds of years, protected and kept by Syrians safe, sound, and respected. That's two. Number three, now when the whole world now is saying that Iran is cancerous to the region, doing horrible things, this is a conflict between Iran and the United States. It shouldn't be settled on the land of Syria. Let the United States target Iran, let Israel target Iran in Iran, not in Syria. So they are causing this problem. And the pretexts are there. They use terrorism as a pretext. They use Daesh as a terrorist organization as a pretext, with Syrian civilians being the victims of all their devilish and satanic plans. This is what concerns us. And this conference being held in Warsaw now is for this purpose, to get Iran out of Syria, to stop Iran from its mischievous and its cancerous effect on the region.
Right, but it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help, even though EU has the chief EU diplomat has gone and boycotted it, said that this is completely rubbish. We do not agree with US's stance and what is going to what US and Israel are trying to achieve at this summit. But don't you feel like other countries who have agreed to participate, or even Poland for that matter, could have taken a stronger stance on the inclusion of Iran if that was really the agenda of this conference?
Well, now, it is not a matter of achieving political victories in this regard. It is a matter of demolishing human rights, undermining people's dignity, displacing people from their homes, torturing them, destruction in a country. All these things are happening, and Iran has a hand in that. This is what's happening, and the Western world is using this as a pretext in order to besiege Iran further. If Iran takes care about its people who are in real need economically for a better, dignified life, it would have been better for Iran. They could have been there as our neighbors and our friends, our brothers, and we could live peacefully. But when they just come,
so let's ask our other guests from Tehran. Mr. Hamid, how do you respond to Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi's claim here? Would you like to counter that argument? What is Iran doing in Syria?
Sure, let's just review some facts. First, Assad's government is the official and the legitimate government in Syria. It has its own. It is recognized by the United Nations. It has its representative in the United Nations, and it has officially invited Iran to actually take part in this fight against terrorism. Second, we have had ISIS fighters committing terrorist acts inside Iran, inside the borders of Iran, inside the parliament of Iran. And it has just less than 2 years passed from that time. So Iran is totally involved in that situation. And if it is not going to protect itself beyond its borders, it's going to fight inside this country. That's something very reasonable in politics and the security of a country. Second, Iran is a regional power. It has not only the responsibility, but also the duty to actually fight against terrorism, to bring peace and security to this region as a, let's say, an island of stability and a secure country and a regional power in this region. So that's something that is the reality on the ground. We cannot change the facts.
So, but when we talk about facts, and just for the sake of we're running out of time, I want to really quickly get through these points. These points that you're saying that Assad's regime is recognized by the UN, it's recognized by countries world over, but so are other undemocratic, authoritarian rules which have been contested for doing huge humanitarian crisis. We are seeing what is happening in Venezuela against Maduro. I mean, are you going to say it is rightly recognized, and so we should continue to look the other way? And then also you've said something about the ISIS posing a cross-border threat. I mean, I'm trying to understand your arguments from the perspective of what our guest Dr. Yahya said. If you could just reflect a little on that, Iran's role in Syria, especially when we're seeing these summits come into place, how can they resolve the issue in Syria, essentially?
First, the main topic and main let's say mindset of Iran is that people's will is the most important thing. So if people in Venezuela want Mr. Guaido, that's fine. Let them have it. If people in Syria want President Assad or anyone else, that's fine. That's even the solution that Iran has always suggested for Palestine, for example. Anywhere, Iran says that the true democracy and true rule of people and will of people is fine and accepted to Iran whatsoever it is. Either it is in the United States or Venezuela, Palestine, whatsoever it is, that is fine. Because Iran basically and principally believes that the people should rule. Second, Iran has been actually following, and one of the demands that Iran is going to make and put pressure on is implementation of the results of Astana talks. Okay, they have agreed upon a constitutional committee. Iran is trying to have it formed. Iran wants the construction procedure actually begin. Iran wants displaced people to get back to their country. And Iran is the first country and the main country that has always been saying that foreign forces should leave this country. Of course, Iran is also saying that, the same thing that Dr. Yahya is wishing for. Because any country has its own integrity and its own independence, and it should be observed. Iran is there because it is invited. It has been invited by the official government, the legitimate government of Syria. So
let's get Doctor. We're running out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I want to, Dr. Yahya, your take on this, especially with the Syrian opposition parties having a big conflict here. Also, with the Assad regime, do you feel that this political solution can be achieved with the involvement of foreign powers? What Mr. Hamid is saying, that if it's been invited, if regional powers are invited to the platform to help the incumbent government, then where does it leave Syria in terms of finding a political and other solution?
He is describing this government of Bashar al-Assad to be an official, legitimate government. Now, you lose legitimacy, you lose humanity when you kill your own people. As simple as that. And we understand that Iran has values. They should have paid attention to these things. And if they were invited or not, that's not the issue. A criminal can invite others in order to help him or
to stay in power. Yes. So what is the solution?
To just defeat his own people. Another thing, terrorist acts in Iran, if they are triggered, it is because of Iran's actions. Now, Iran has the right to protect itself, but at the same time, others have the right to say to Iran, stop mingling, stop interfering in other people's situations.
But Dr. Yahya, I'm sorry, I have to play the devil's advocate here, and I'm sorry for rushing you through this since we're running out of time, and I really want to get to the bottom of it. What you're asking for really is an ideal world, and this is not an ideal world. This is a region of proxy wars. Who is the true ally here, and of whom? The people of Syria or the incumbent government? How do we resolve? Where do we go forward from here?
In an ideal world, there is a UN resolution pertaining to Syria to bring Syria and Syrians back to track of life. And if everybody is committed to that, to those resolutions, we can find a solution. But it has to have determination. It has to have a real, honest will in order to help Syrians come back to life. This is what we want.
There's a whole issue of the honest will, because it's not just the Syrian government and the people of Syria or the opposition parties. There are militant groups there. Who fights them?
Oh, no, the militants originally really have been created as a pretext in order to justify the regime's brutal actions against its own people. Because nobody would believe that a regime would kill its own people. So without the pretext of somewhere that terrorism or a conspiracy or whatever, they create that in order to justify for themselves those brutal actions against their own people. This is the root of the bottom of the whole thing.
So the root of the problem is the militant factions, the troublemakers within Syria are being financed, being supported by outside powers. Mr. Hamid, your comments quickly as we end the show?
That's the point, yeah. We actually believe that there are foreign fighters supported by foreigners like the United States and some other Arab countries in the region. That's right, that's what we say actually. And the government in Syria is fighting against them. That's right. If there is no fighters, so what is problem with the government? There are fighters, and they are actually being sponsored and supported by outsiders, mainly the United States, the Arab countries in the region, and some European countries. That's the point we say. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hamid and Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi, for your valuable input here on Newswire. It remains to be seen what will be achieved from the Warsaw Summit, and at the same time, whether an agreement between the presidents of Iran, Turkey, and Russia can be can be effective for Syria in the Sochi summit. However, we will continue to see the war going on within its borders, and the question will remain that what solution is there to stop the killings of innocent children and civilians. And with that, we've come to the end of the show. You can stay tuned to Indus News for more updates, not just on Syria, but from news around the world. Until next time, goodbye.